Welcome to Bible Study. This is the Bible study I'm preparing for March 30th in 2025 at St. Michael's Lutheran Church. For this winter and springtime, we've been looking at the wisdom literature in the Old Testament so far. This is going to bring us today to Ecclesiastes chapters 3 and 4. If you have a Bible handy, you might turn to that and follow along. Wisdom literature is always asking this question of what is a good life? And last week, as we looked at chapters 1 and 2, we heard Solomon asking this question of, is that even possible? Is a good life something that one can even see? He had put his hand to pursuing what many would call good life in a variety of different ways, by the pursuit of wisdom, by the pursuit of wealth. He built buildings, he sought significance, he wanted to leave a mark, he dove into pleasure, everything he pursued. And of course, he's being Solomon and being a king and being the wisest man who ever lived. When Solomon put his hand to do something, and he did it better than anybody else. And every time he would arrive at the end of those quests for a good life and discover it was empty. Some of it was good. He said wisdom is good and folly is bad, but was it really a good life? And he almost had to say, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. When we turn to chapter 3, Solomon is going to do something a little different. He's going to now expand this a little bit, and he's going to do it with the illustration of time, and by placing everything in its time. So you'll notice I'm standing in front of the clock today. That's going to be an important little backdrop for what it is that we're going to say. Listen to these words from this very famous passage from Ecclesiastes, made into a popular song in the 1960s. A time for everything. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to kill, a time to heal. A time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to cast away stones, and a time to gather stones together. A time to embrace, and a time to refrain from embracing. A time to seek, and a time to lose. A time to keep, and a time to cast away. A time to tear, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time for war, and a time for peace. All of these different times. And not everything is appropriate to every time. What gain has the worker from his toil, wonders Solomon? What I love about the book of Ecclesiastes is that he allows the reader to ask any question. There are no off-limit questions. Solomon is giving a place to people who ask difficult, cynical questions of life. Those are not off-limits for a Christian. They are not off-limits for a person who follows God. God is always bigger than all of our doubts and our concerns. He's always bigger than anything that we might concoct. And so God welcomes them. He welcomed the challenge of Job in that disturbing book. He welcomes the questions people ask Jesus in the Gospels. He welcomes the questions that Solomon is asking. And truly, he welcomes the questions you may ask. One of the things I really love about our Lutheran hymnody as well is that it really allows us to bring the full range of our human emotions. We don't always have to sing happy songs. We can sing songs that speak of grieving and of sorrow. We can remember that There are times when we are disappointed. And that whole range of human emotion and of human intellect and of humanity itself is something we bring to God. And that's a really good thing. What gain has the worker from his toil? We don't have to be afraid of that question. I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. And also, he has put eternity into man's heart. Yet, so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. He says it seems like God has given us the idea of what is beautiful, and he has put eternity into our heart, and yet we know that we are finite. We live under that clock, and that clock just keeps ticking away, and old age comes, and death comes, and the mortality rate of being human is 100%. God has put eternity into our hearts. He seems to be almost a little angry at God at this point. God, why have you put this here if all it's going to do is frustrate me? I perceived that there is nothing better for them than to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Walk the road that stretches before you. Don't strive for another. Live the life that you've been given. Love the people that are in it. Do the job as well as you can. Be a good neighbor, a friend, a spouse, a child, a parent. That is a good life. Everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. Contentment. Now, I want you to notice here that this is now God's gift to us. Before, we've been talking about this striving after the wind, all of this toil that people do and all of these things that we're supposed to do. But now we just talked about something God did. I perceive that whatever God does endures forever. That good life of loving your children and your spouse, of being a good employer or a good employee, being a good neighbor and all those things. He says this is really from God, and God gives this to endure forever. If you remember in 1 Corinthians 13, Paul talks about all of these things that will pass away. Knowledge and wisdom were going to pass away. Strength and all of these things of this life are going to pass away. Even faith will pass away, and my hope will end. Because in heaven I won't believe or hope in anything because I'll have it. But love that endures, says Paul. Love is the one thing we can do now, which is also going to be done in heaven. And so, I think this is what Solomon is talking about here. That which has already been and that which is to be has already been, and God seeks what has been driven away. Nothing can be added to it, or nothing can be taken from it. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice there was wickedness, and in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. He looks around in this world and he says, there's a lot of people who aren't doing this. And what is more, there's a great deal of hurt. And this world seems really, really broken. I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and of every work. So notice we're back to this topic of time. And while there is a time to rejoice and a time to weep, and there's a time for all of these different things, there is also a time of God's judgment. God will judge the righteous and the wicked. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. And so now he asks, why has God put this desire in my heart for eternity? Why has he made me dissatisfied with the way things are? Why has he shown me what beauty is and then made me watch it decay? Because God wants us to see our need for him. Because there is no beauty apart from God. There is no eternity apart from God. And if we try and find something else to be beautiful or to be eternal, it is but an idol. We must know that we are beasts, says Solomon. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. We all die. They all have the same breath. Man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. This humanity of mine will pass away. They all go to one place, the compost bin. All from the dust, and to the dust they return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down? Who knows what happens after they die? I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? It is, in an empirical sense, utterly unknowable to us. We must trust and believe. But Solomon says, if you just look at the facts of it, live life as best as you can. Again, I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power. There was no one to comfort them. And I thought the dead who are already dead are more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not yet seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Even the dead have suffered. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. It's a vapor. He sees that so many of the things that people do that we count as great are really self-serving. The fool folds his hands and he eats his own body. Better a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. Contentment. Again I saw vanity under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. That the good life is rooted in relationship, not in what the world counts as success. It's rooted in those people whom we love and who love us. And he saw this man who toiled and toiled and toiled and toiled, and in so doing had driven away everybody. And Solomon says, why? What good is all that money if it isn't for people? 2 are better than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. And that reward is their relationship. If they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls, and he has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will always withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. Better was a poor and wise youth, he says, than an old and foolish king. This powerless young man who is wise is in a much better place than an old, powerful, but foolish king who no longer knows how to take advice. And you wonder whether Solomon isn't doing a little self-reflection right there. For he, that is the young man, went from prison to the throne. though in his own kingdom he had been born poor. I think he's talking about Joseph here. I saw all the living who move about under the sun, along with that youth who was to stand in the king's place. There was no end of all the people, all of whom he led. Yet those who come later will not rejoice in him. Surely this is also a vanity and a striving after the wind. He remembers that there was a king who may have been even more powerful than Solomon, Joseph. He started out as a nobody, a slave in Egypt. But it says in Genesis that the Lord was with him, and he trusted in God, and therefore he was wise, and he became the leader of all. And yet, a day comes when there rises a Pharaoh in Egypt who does not remember Joseph. Time. We all live under this brutal taskmaster of time. And no matter how we strive to overcome it, whether that is by creating monuments to ourselves, writing great books, or doing something else by creating, it through progeny and children, or whatever we can imagine, time will always win. Vanity, vanity, says the preacher. But God, in the midst of all of that, and though suffering abounds, is found in those simple and real things of life. And that life which takes satisfaction in the friendships and the family, in the toil and the work, in the pleasures, and says, thank you, God. Therein is meaning. Let's talk more about this on Sunday. God bless you.